Hello, and welcome to Wesley United Methodist Church of Trenton, Missouri. Our church is located at 113 East 9th Street, which is on the corner of 9th and Washington in Trenton, Missouri. You can call our office between the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday at 660-359-6762, or visit our website at wesleyunitedmethodist.us. Now we invite you to open your heart, mind, and body to the Word of God with Reverend Barry Boulware.
Is a lady we've all known and loved for many years. She's been known in the community, and she is, what can you say about Dixie Pickett? Well, I asked Dixie to say something about herself because I thought I might cry if I said something about Dixie. She said she became a member of this church when Gene Cole visited Royce Atkins at their home when he had cancer. And Gene noticed that the bushes need trimming, so he went home and got his clippers and he cut the bushes for them. And that act of kindness and sharing by that minister, Reverend Cole, is what made Dixie decide she wanted to be a part of a congregation like this. So she joined the Methodist Church, and we have been forever grateful. She's loved her 50-year career as a nurse, and some of you maybe have been blessed by her nursing skills. Always a kind, compassionate, caring heart when Dixie was taking care of you. And now she is enjoying retirement with her husband Tom and her dog Herbie. And it sounds like, from the title of her sermon, we just all might need to go have a piece of pie with Dixie. So welcome, Dixie, please.
I forgot that I might have to read the scripture, but it is be kind one to another. Come by for pie. This is my obituary, which I wrote about 10 years ago. It says, when Dixie was a little girl, she dreamed that heaven was long tables full of all kinds of pie. And they would sit around the table with Jesus, who looked sort of like the picture of Jesus in our church nursery that Greg Allen has done. But they would sit on his lap and he would tell stories to the little children. And then they would eat some more pie. Then they'd run out in the back and play some tennis or hopscotch or something and have a little sliver of pie on the way. And this was my idea of heaven. So, since she is having pie today with her Heavenly Father, she wanted everyone who loved her to come by and have a little piece of pie and celebrate her life. In the church basement maybe, with some show tunes and some jazzy music. I knew that I wanted to tell you all about some people that have made a difference in my life. That is my sermon, but I kind of wanted to tie it in with the pie theme, so I gave them all a pie name. And my first one is Mrs. Peach Pie. When Lorene was born in the South in 1900s, early 1900s, she immediately saw how bad it was for there to be segregation. And she vowed as a young girl that she would never, ever be prejudiced and that she would always try to love everyone the same. So when she moved to Missouri as a young woman, she made an effort to get acquainted with all the black people in town, which was about 10 at that time. And she kind of hung around with them. And Camp Crowder was just outside of the hometown, and soldiers were there during World War II from all over the United States, and their wives from all over the world. So she kind of took up with them, and when she would have a birthday party or a church gathering, it always sort of resembled a little United Nations, because there would be people there from everywhere. And this was what she was known for. No stray dog ever left her house hungry. No hobo, remember the hobos before the homeless, ever left her house hungry. In fact, she usually had them seated at the kitchen table trying to tell them about the Lord if anybody stopped by. And the same ones came back year after year, usually, because they knew a good thing. When she was down along the way, she got ill. And she had to go to KU Medical Center and was by herself there. She had to go alone. And she said that night, a big lady from Hawaii, one of the nurse aides, came and saw her crying and sad and sick, and took her in her big arms and hugged her to her. And she said, I think that God sent that angel to me that night, because I'd always loved all kinds of people. When I got there the next day, the aide had brought her a bouquet of flowers, and she was enjoying them. And she said, I think it was just meant to be that she was here. So this lady was my mom. She died 3 days later. She was 38 years old. Now, the next people I want to tell you about was her sidekick, her best friend. And she had everything in the whole world. She was beautiful, she was intelligent, she could do anything, she could be anything, but she didn't have any children. And the thing, of course, she wanted more than anything was children. So she started rescuing children, and I mean this literally. There was a family there that the mother had tuberculosis and was having to go away to a sanitarium. The dad was in the military overseas, what to do with the children, called Virginia. So Virginia went and brought those children home with her and actually ended up raising them. Another time she heard the story of a family of kids aged 2 to 14 that were living in a deserted filling station after their mother had died of cancer. They were trying to stay together, and they did get to stay together because Virginia went and brought them to her home, and she later adopted all of those kids. She was a wonderful woman, and I do remember once she brought a train, what do you call those cars, I guess, full of kids from the orphanage in St. Louis Baptist home, and she was going, she was trying to get them adopted out, and she ended up being the only one that adopted any of them. She ended up with 3, but one of them that came's family didn't show up to meet them down at the station, so my mother was always with Virginia. She stepped forward and said, oh yes, he was supposed to go home with us. Well, she had already bought all of our Christmas presents. It was right at Christmas time. She had no more money to buy anything. So she gathered my brothers, Bud and Joe, and my little sister Jenny, and said, you're going to have to give him one of your presents on Christmas morning. So when I wrote this story up years later, I said, in the spirit with which we had been raised by her, we all gave him our best gift. We always talk about that Christmas when we get together. Now, there's a famous psychologist and teacher that I've liked a lot through the years. His name was Leo Biscaglia, and he tells a story that makes me wonder if he had met Virginia somewhere along the way. He tells a little boy is standing outside of his shoe store, barefooted, looking in the window, and this beautiful lady comes by and says, my, why are you so deep in thought about? And he said, I'm asking God to give me a pair of those shoes. So she took him by the hand, took him in the store, washed his feet, put on some clean socks and a new pair of shoes, and he looked up at her and said, are you God's wife? My next lady was a patient. Since my mother died so young, I was always looking for a mother figure. You know, all these old ladies I just really loved because I thought, this is my mom. Well, when I met her, it's been about 25 years ago, but I had figured life out. If you had a few coins in your pocket, you could be happy in your old age. Well, as I drove down this long dirt country road and pulled up into the dirt yard and saw the outhouse on one side and the cistern on the other side and the wood coming out of the chimney, I had the feeling that maybe that wasn't the case here. Then when I went in and met her, she had been in her bed for 10 years, had never been out of bed. Her name was Jessie. She's my rhubarb pie because she was really plain, strong, and just an inspiration every time we went to see her. Well, one day, into having given her a bath, I think, every couple of weeks for a long time, she said, "It came today." So, what came today, Jessie? The record that I ordered from the healing preacher, and I paid $100 for it, so it better work. He said, "Did you think you were just going to listen to that, get up out of your bed, and walk?" "Well, I did," she said. Well, I went home with that on my heart, and that night I had a dream, and I dreamed that her husband, who always took her everything to the bed to cook and can, and they did everything from this bed, but he had fallen, and this is all a dream. He had fallen, taking her something to fix, and she got up out of bed. Her little lower half was normal again. She got him up. She was so excited. She went out in her flimsy little nightgown and ice skated on her lawn. Well, I woke up with that, her on her feet in my mind. And so that day when I went to see her, I said, "Did you ever want to, I didn't realize you really wanted to get out of this bed. But you really do, don't you?" And she said, I've laid here for 10 years trying to think how I could get out of this bed. And I said, "Well, I've got it all figured out. We're going to get one of those lifts, and we're going to lift you up into a reclining wheelchair," because she had lain for so long. I really was afraid she couldn't sit upright. She could later on. But we got her up, and it was just a wonderful experience. It's one of my best nursing stories that I love to tell. Now, I have 4 men. It's Women's Day, but I got to mention my 4 men. When I was in high school, I had the best speech teacher. Thanks to him, I can get up here today and talk to you all, and I'm not overly nervous, maybe a little bit, but I was younger then. But when we all get together in my hometown, the man that made the biggest difference in my life and in many people's lives was our speech teacher. He drug us to every contest, any place there was an audience, and who would go to Kansas City? He'd always take us out to eat at the New Bach Hotel. Now that was fancy in the 50s. I mean, that was something. And he paid for the meal out of his own pocket. But he wanted us, the hicks from the sticks is what he called us, to have a little culture. And when the boys were picking their teeth out front with a toothpick, he said, "This is not what I brought you here to learn. You don't want to act like that." But when we get together, there's an admiral, a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, and they all say that he made the biggest difference in their life of anybody we knew. This other one was also a teacher. You teachers will like this. But he was my Latin teacher. And when I was a sophomore in high school, I was taking Latin, and I was not getting Latin. In fact, I was failing Latin. And he called me one day and said, "You're not doing very well. Why don't you drop this?" Because he knew I wanted to go to nurses training even then. You need it for nurses training. And he said, "Why don't you drop it and audit it and then come back and take it for credit next year, and I'll help you get through it." So I did. These men, I'm calling my pumpkin pies with whipped cream because they're all so special. But he did get me through Latin, and this is the honest to goodness. Life is so good to us, and there are not too many chance meetings, I don't think. But my first night back in Neosho, Missouri, working as a registered nurse in the hospital, Mr. Summers was my patient. And he had cancer for a long time and was really very debilitated and bad. And at bedtime, I went back and gave him a back rub. You used to get a back rub when you went to the hospital, guys. Gave him a back rub, and we talked. And he told me his fears, and I told him my sympathies because it was so sad. And then he said, he reached over and petted me and said, I'm so glad you made it through Latin so you could come back here tonight and be my nurse. Now, I'm going to change the tone a little bit because that one always kind of gets to me. This is a poem written by a man in a nursing home. And this book is in our library. I got it there. And it's called Talking with God in Old Age by Missy Buchanan. But the name of the poem is What's for Dessert? I like to play a little game with myself. I try to guess what we'll have for dessert each day. I have my favorites, of course. Coconut pie and banana pudding. I don't even mind the low-cal, sugar-free kind that makes you believe you're eating something sinfully delectable. But whoever decided that applesauce qualifies as a dessert is just plain wrong. There's one thing I know for certain. Most of us old ones look forward to dessert. Why shouldn't we? A dollop of whipped cream on fresh strawberries will perk up anyone's day. So, I scope out dessert long before I've had a single bite of salad, anticipating what's to come. I think about how dessert makes even a so-so meal somehow better. Now, as my life draws to fulfillment, I smile when I consider dessert. Your word is sweet, O God. I know the best is yet to come. Now, my next, and I read that because I wanted to mention Dr. Duffy. I know he meant a lot to a lot of people here in Trenton, and I didn't know him that well, but when I worked at the nursing home in the 70s, I wanted all of our residents who were diabetic to get to have pumpkin pie with whipped cream for Thanksgiving. Well, the dietary supervisor was just as convinced that though no diabetic would eat a bite of sugar as long as she was out of the kitchen. So, Dr. Duffy was out there one day, and I told him my dilemma, and he said, oh, that's easy, I can solve that. So he took out his prescription pad and wrote, pumpkin pie with whipped cream for all diabetics. And that is one of the memories. I know you all have your own memories of Dr. Duffy. The last person is my husband, Tom. I'd like to mention him. We were married 34 years ago in Chillicothe by Earl Griffin, which I know a lot of you all remember. And I was going to use one of Earl's sermons on love today. It's a wonderful sermon. I've kept it all these years, but I decided I wanted to tell my own love stories instead of using his. Next time I speak, I'll use that one. I wanted to say about in a marriage, I used to work for this doctor that said, we need love the most when we deserve it the least, or when we are at our most unlovable. And I think in a marriage, many times, our spouses do see our worst side, unfortunately. I always think of the story of somebody asking if they were reincarnated, what would they like to be when they came back to life? And one man said, I'd like to be my wife's dog. And the other man said, I'd like to be my wife's second husband. And I like that one. So with Tom, I got Tom Lee and Kathy and Linda and Herbie the first. So I wanted to mention them. Now friends, my friends are the last thing I'm going to mention here, and they're my chocolate pies. I mean, most of my girlfriends do love chocolate, but you know, it's a rich, wonderful pie, and so I lumped them all together, all my friends that I've had through the years, and I do have most of them that I've had through the years. To my one friend, Mary Sue, who's sitting up in the balcony today, and she has all of the qualities of most of the friends I've had. But we have spent many an hour together, been on every back road in Grundy County without a Garmin or a cell phone. I don't know how we did it. We did end up in a cow pasture one time, having taken the wrong turn, but and I think that's the only time that happened. but we had lots of adventures together. And Carolyn Foreman, I wanted to mention you because I know you did all those visits before I did, and they were wonderful times, weren't they? Now, this is my story that I like to tell about when Mary Sue and I were nursing. We had some days that would just break your heart, and some days that were just so funny you couldn't quit laughing all day. The funny story I want to tell you was our big man that we got in the bathtub. And while he was in the tub, he got the baby oil in the tub. And when we went to get him out, I mean, there was no way. She pushed, and I pulled, and she pushed, and I pulled, and he tugged, and we drained the tub. And she got in the tub behind him, and I got in the tub in front of him. We vomited in the tub, and I mean, it was quite a spectacle. Finally, I think he grabbed hold of the little lavatory that was close by and helped us, and but I think it was his last bath. We always remember that one. But this is our favorite story. We oftentimes did a devotion in the car on the way to see our patients. And the worst trouble we had with the patient, the longer the devotion would be. But this one day, we read a devotion, and it said, if you want to be an instrument of God's love, you need to find a point of love in some people. And we were going to see this couple that he was Mr. Apple Pie and she was Mrs. Persimmon Pie. We did not like to go there because we'd have our agenda and she'd have hers, and by the time we got them all done, it'd be a half a day. The worst thing she had us do was walk him. And he couldn't walk, and he couldn't stand, and he had no weight bearing. So we'd laugh and say, well, we're going to go take a step and drag him, take a step and drag him. But we did that because she wanted us to do it. But we really, really, really didn't like going to that house. So this is the devotion we read. This preacher had, when he was in seminary, he had heard this story about finding a point of love. And he'd sort of carried it around with him through the years, but hadn't had an occasion to use it. In his church was a most troublesome lady. She was there when he got there. She was tugging after him when he left. He absolutely could not get away from her. And she was really starting to irritate him. He wanted to be an instrument for God's love, but he just couldn't get away from that woman. So he thought about that sermon he had heard all those years ago, and he decided he'd find her point of love. So he arrived early to church, took her into the sanctuary, sat down by her, and said, what were you like as a little girl? Well, come to find out, she had been from a big family, very poor, had been lonesome and sick a great deal at the time. And when he heard her story with his heart, he said, I listened with my heart that day. And she was so pleased that I wanted to know about her, that she was never a problem for me anymore. And so we were hoping that we decided that the point of love in this family, Mr. Apple Pie and Mrs. Persimmon, was our attitude toward her. And that we were going to go in with a loving, her point of love was she took wonderful care of him. And she loved him so much. And that was her point of love. And when we walked in the door that day, and this is the truth, she was never a problem again. Because we went in with a new attitude. She hadn't changed at all. Now, we used that same strategy several other times. Didn't always work. In fact, I think it did work about as much as it didn't. And it's a good tool when you're working with people, because most of us can find something that's irritating, but to find that point of love is really something special. I used to tell a few stories, and I still do, as you can tell. But this is one I liked, and it was about heaven and hell. And there was a little girl who wanted to see what heaven and hell were like. So she went to the angel and said, would you take me So, oh sure, so they flew down to hell. And you know, it wasn't as bad as she always thought it was. There were long tables full of food, and the breeze was blowing. It was not a bad place to be, except everybody was unhappy. They were moaning and crying, and from their shoulders to their elbows, they had chains that were restricting them, and they couldn't reach down and eat all this wonderful food. The little girl was, oh, take me away, she says. I don't want to be down here. So they went to heaven. And when they got to heaven, there were long rows of tables full of wonderful food, and all the people there were happy and singing and joyful, and they too had chains from their shoulders to their elbows, but they reached across the table and fed each other. Now, my vision of Jesus hasn't changed much since I was a little girl. But I think when I get to heaven and he meets me at the door, this is how it's going to be. He's going to look like he always did. I'm going to be old and gray and have my hearing aid and my appliances and my pills and my aches and my pains and my basket of things to get organized, those of you who know me. And he's going to say, just leave all that outside. You don't need it here. And he's going to whisper in my ear and say, I told your mom you were coming today. So she's got all your friends in the kitchen baking pies. You'll want to go by and see her. And then you'll want to go down and see your little dogs are still asleep, but the little dogs that went on before you, you'll want to see them. And you'll recognize the keeper of the dogs because he's the guy that mistreated your dog when you were a little girl, and you've had a grudge against him all these years. And I forgave him years ago when he asked me to, and Noah says he's the best helper with the animals that he ever had. So, go say hello to all of those people, and then when you're done, come back down here, and we'll sit at this long table, and we'll all have some pie.
Thank you for joining us on our pre-recorded Sunday morning service. If you would like a copy, you can contact the office at 660-359-6762 or email us at wesleyum@sbcglobal.net. Feel free to visit us in person or online at wesleyunitedmethodist.us, where you will always find open hearts, open minds, and open doors. May the blessings of Jesus Christ be upon you in every aspect of your life.